Hi everyone. Today we're looking at tissues. All of our body's functions happen because of the way that different tissues work together. So we're going to look at the four main or primary tissue types and then look at how tissue repair works. The four primary tissue types are epithelial, connective, nervous, and muscle tissues. We're going to first look at epithelial tissue, which is the type of tissue that covers all of our body surfaces, lines internal cavities and organs, and it also forms glands. So epithelial tissue's role is mostly protection, but it also plays roles in absorption, filtration, secretion, and sensation. While there are different types of epithelial tissue, they all share a group of features. Polarity is one, so epithelium, because it's covering, it's going to have a free surface, and then it's going to have a surface that's attached to the tissue below. The cells in epithelial tissue are really tightly packed, and they're connected to each other with various cellular connections like tight junctions and desmosomes. All epithelial tissue is supported by a non-living basement membrane. Epithelial tissue does not have any blood vessels, so it's called avascular. A means without, so without blood vessels. But it is innervated, so there are nerve endings that are found in epithelial tissue. And the final characteristic is that it regenerates very quickly. Because it's on the surface, it's going to get a lot of abrasions, and so there's a lot of mitosis happening in epithelial tissue. We classify epithelial tissue by the number of layers and the shape of its cells. So when we look at simple epithelium, it's one layer. And simple epithelium is typically involved in absorption and filtration. Stratified epithelium is many layers, and this is best for protection. If you lose one layer of stratified epithelium, you still have plenty of layers underneath. The cell shapes include squamous, which is flat or scale-like, cuboidal, cube-shaped, and columnar, which are taller cells than they are wide. Some of the examples that we have of these tissues: simple squamous epithelium is found where substances need to pass through quickly in the lungs and the capillary beds. Simple cuboidal we find in the kidneys and glands. Columnar lines the digestive tract. And pseudostratified columnar, which is this one over here in the bottom corner, which is actually a simple tissue type, but it looks like it might be stratified. Pseudostratified columnar is found in the respiratory tract. Looking at stratified examples, stratified squamous is found on our skin, on our mouth, in the rectum, all of our body openings, so multiple layers for protection. Stratified cuboidal and columnar aren't seen all that often, but they are found in larger ducts. There's another type of epithelium called transitional epithelium that is only found in the urinary system. Epithelial tissue also forms glands. So there's endocrine glands, which are ductless, and they secrete hormones directly into the blood. And then there are exocrine glands that have ducts and release things like sweat, mucus, and saliva onto the external surfaces. In addition to endocrine and exocrine, glands are classified by the way they secrete. So merocrine glands secrete by exocytosis. Holocrine glands, the cells actually burst to release the contents. So holocrine glands, an example, are oil glands. And then apocrine glands, a little bit of the cell pinches off with the secretion, but the cell itself is not totally destroyed like in a holocrine gland. And you can see from this illustration that there are different types of ducts, duct branching, and the various different glands. The next type of tissue is connective tissue. Connective tissue is the most abundant tissue in our bodies. There's all sorts of different connective tissue. It supports, connects, and protects. And what all connective tissue has in common is that it starts in this embryonic tissue called the mesenchyme. There are other characteristics that connective tissue has. Connective tissue sometimes is avascular, like cartilage, or it's highly vascular, like bone. Connective tissue, unlike epithelial tissue, tends to have a lot of extracellular matrix, so that stuff that surrounds the cells that's not cellular. So there's a lot of space in between the cells of connective tissue. That extracellular matrix is made out of ground substance, which is kind of gooey and it fills the space surrounding the cells. And within the ground substance are fibers. Collagen fibers increase strength. Elastic fibers make things stretch, and reticular fibers form like networks, almost like spider webs. And we find different types of cells in the connective tissue. So this illustration is just kind of a generic connective tissue, and we see adipocytes and fibroblasts. So adipocytes are fat cells. Fibroblasts are cells that, whenever we see blast, it means making or building. So fibroblasts means that these cells make fibers. We also have things like chondrocytes and osteocytes and cartilage and bone. There are many different types of connective tissue that we cover in depth in lab. I'm not going to cover them in depth here, but I do expect you to be familiar with the tissue types that you covered in lab, their structure and function. Muscle tissue is our third type of tissue that we're looking at, and muscle tissue all shortens. So whether we're talking about skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, or smooth muscle, the cells in muscle tissue are all able to shorten, and that creates movement. So skeletal muscle is what we see on the top. Skeletal muscle is voluntary muscle, so part of our brain has to make a decision for that skeletal muscle to move. It's striated, so we see these stripes, and skeletal tissue generally is moving bones, right? The next type of tissue that we see here is smooth muscle. We don't see any stripes like we did in the skeletal muscle. There's no striations then. And it's found in hollow organs like the stomach and the bladder, and blood vessels. So it's quite useful in dilation of tubes. And then the third one is cardiac tissue. It's striated, similar to skeletal muscle. It's involuntary. We fortunately don't have to think about our heart beating. And it also has kind of special attachments in between the cells called intercalated discs. And finally, we have have nervous tissue. So all nervous tissue sends signals, right? So it's excitable. It makes up all the brain, the spinal cord, and then the nerves. It's made of different types of cells. The neurons are the ones that can create an action potential or create a nervous signal, and they send that signal on to other cells. And then there's supporting cells that are called neuroglial cells, and those neuroglial cells protect and insulate neurons. We're learning more about them as time goes on. It looks like some of them are involved in memory as well. In each organ system, we're going to look at repair in those organs, but before we get into the details, you need to kind of have a global understanding of what happens during tissue repair. There's 3 major steps when there's an injury. The first step is inflammation. So inflammation, chemicals are released that tells the body that there's been an injury, and those chemicals are going to call more fluid to the area, white blood cells, all sorts of different immune cells to kind of stabilize that area and clean out debris and any pathogens that make their way in. The next step is called organization. An organization sets the stage for new blood tissues to grow. It starts with granulation tissue, which restores that blood supply to the damaged tissue. And the last step is either regeneration and or fibrosis. So regeneration is when, during healing, the same tissue that was injured forms again. So if you have an injury in your epithelial tissue, that's very likely to happen because epithelial tissue goes through mitosis so much and regenerates pretty well. But if you have an injury in the connective tissue, the underlying connective tissue, you're going to likely get a scar because connective tissue doesn't regenerate so well, and so it's replaced with fibrotic tissue. So when you get fibrotic tissue in your connective tissue, you can see the scar on the surface. And as a general rule, things like skin and bone regenerate very well. Other things like cardiac muscle, nervous tissue, those don't regenerate so well, and they're usually replaced with scar tissue. There's a table of regeneration in your notes for lecture for this week. The one thing I didn't talk about in this video are membranes. Membranes are another thing that we go through in lab. But just very quickly, I do want you to be aware of cutaneous membranes, mucous membranes, and serous membranes. Cutaneous membrane is a dry membrane, it's your skin. Mucous membranes line cavities that open to the outside, so like the respiratory, digestive, reproductive tracts. Those are all going to be mucous membranes, those are moist membranes. And then serous membranes are wet membranes, and they line enclosed body cavities like the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity, forming like the pleura and the peritoneum. Okay. Hope this video is helpful. I hope you spend some time looking at your notes this week, and please post if you have any questions.